Hello and welcome to the Jake and Gino Podcast. My name is Gino Barbaro, one of the co-founders of Jake and Gino, and today our guest is no stranger to overcoming adversity. At the age of 27, Mark Silverman was homeless and malnourished. Now he helps CEOs and fast-rising high achievers leverage their resources and teams for greater impact. Welcome to the show, Mark. How are you doing, brother?
Great to be here. I love that introduction. It makes people just can't wait to see what I have to say about success in multifamily homes.
Well, Mark, when I got on with you, I'm like, you don't look like you're 27. You've gone a long way from that, and you definitely don't look malnourished. So there's a lot of time in between that.
Right.
But the first question, how did you get to that point in your life when you're 27 years old, you're living in your car, you're broke, and then you got to go to your older brother, I'm assuming, who has money. How did you get to that point in your life?
Drugs, alcohol, sex, having a good time, undiagnosed ADHD, uh, all of that stuff. So I never created the skills to actually create a life. So for me, I went to college at 18 and quickly dropped out because I got a job in a coat check in a bar, and I was making $100 a night and all I could drink. So I never went back to college. That was way more fun than school. So drugs and alcohol had a huge part in it, and also just never the undiagnosed ADD is so big now, to understand why I couldn't focus on anything, why I was so attracted to shiny objects and dopamine. So all of that was fun for a really long time, because this was back in the late 70s, early 80s. So cocaine and all kinds of good stuff were going on, but that also leads to crashing and burning really quickly. So everything fell apart.
Let's pull that into money and multifamily. Why what Mark just said to me, I've been learning for the last couple of years, it's revolutionary. Understanding your relationship with money and the four neurochemicals, the dopamine, the serotonin, the endorphins, and the oxytocin. What the hell does that have to do with multifamily or money? It has everything to do with money, because if you are the instant gratification, if you don't understand your relationship with money, if you can't save some money to be able to buy an asset, it's going to be a lot harder for you to create wealth. And if you're on the dopamine kick where, oh, I just flipped a deal and I'm going to flip another deal, you're doing transactions, that's great. Transactions pay the bills and put some money in your pocket. But if you want to create real success, you want to create a multifamily empire, buy some assets for the long term, you're going to have to understand how the brain works and how you can use it to your advantage, dopamine. I'm not saying you can't, but understanding that and understanding and becoming aware. If you're feeling bad and you have to run to the mall and spend some money, that makes you feel good. A week later, that wears off. And there becomes a constant cycle. So I could see Mark being young, going to the bar, making $100, a lot of money. The dopamine goes to the bar, grabs a couple beers, dopamine again, crashes, and rinse and repeat and rinse and repeat. Mark, did you come from a family? I mean, were your parents married? Because it seems like your brother was successful and he didn't fall into that trap.
Actually, my brother did die of addiction,
Oh, I'm sorry.
after he just last year, after he got me sober. So I owe everything to him. He got me so. The only reason I have kids, the only reason I have a career, the only reason I wrote books and do everything that I do is because my brother got me sober. So everything I do is in honor of him. Because this disease of addiction is insidious, and it can wait decades and still get you. So there, but for the grace of God, go I. But yeah, no, I had a mother and a father who neither one of them graduated high school. That story. Both worked blue collar jobs. Provided for us. Didn't know anything about college. Didn't know anything about setting us up for a life. But they were good people. Worked hard and gave us a good upbringing. But there was. They were busy working while I was busy drinking in high school, right? Like
Mhm.
they really weren't able to pay attention to what I was doing. But I came from a decent family.
hmm And how did you kick the habit? I mean, it sounded like your brother took you in, and how did you get your quote unquote life on track after that?
So I was trying to borrow some. I was looking at homeless shelters in Seattle, and I would call my brother collect, because this was before cell phones. This was before everything, and I said, he was going to wire me money to Western Union. If you remember Western Union, there was no Zelle or Venmo. It was, you had to go to a specific Western Union and wait for your money to show up there, and we couldn't figure that out. So finally, he said, "Why don't you drive to Washington D.C. and stay a little while." So since I was driving all around the country, I just started driving east, living on. I had a Unicall 76 credit card, which still had some money left on it. So I ate at gas stations along the way, slept in my car, and I got here, and all my brother and all his friends unknown to me, were all sober. They were all in AA. They were all in NA. They were all going to the gym. They were all turning their lives around from the decade of cocaine and drug use that I had seen before that. So my brother was a huge deal in Washington D.C. So it was glamorous. It was fun to come into town. And I was 120, I was 130 pounds, soaking wet. And he said, "You're gonna if you're gonna stay with me," he says, "you can stay with me for a year, but you have to go to AA and NA meetings. You need to go to the gym with me and my friends, and you're going to run with us." I was like, I got no place to go, so I stayed and wound up going to the meetings and getting sober and just step by step by step creating a life.
So the accountability piece was huge for you, wasn't it?
It was, yeah, accountability. It was kind of blackmail. It was like either live in my truck or, and his friends were like they were the shiny, cool people of Georgetown. So it wasn't a hard choice to be thrust in the middle of that opulence and that fun,
Hmm.
and that cachet. So God was good to me because he knew I needed a little dopamine, so that was helpful.
And then once you did that, how did you get your life on track? What was the next thing you did? Did you get a job? Did you start a career? Did you go back to
So
college?
I got a job. I got a job at the Four Seasons because I knew how to wait tables and bartend, and so I waited on tables. Got sober. Took a college class. Took two college classes. Took three college classes, and got straight A's in college. It took me until my 40s to get my college degree after I was married and after I had kids, but I got my college degree. So what happened was I wound up getting married and having two children. And in the Four Seasons, I did such a good job that I talked myself into a professional job in the front office. And I had never seen a fax machine before. Like I knew what a copier was, but that was it. And I knew computers a little bit because I was taking computer science in my community college. So they told me I was the first person they ever let come out of the restaurant and take a professional job. And that was my start. To not be sticky and not be full of food, because my whole family was the restaurant business my whole life, was something new. And then I took a personality test that said I should be either a lawyer or a salesman. And I was like, I'm never going to go to school to be a lawyer. And plus, I'm a little shy. So I'm going to try being a salesman. And I took a job in sales, and it was terrible. I'm introverted. I'm shy. I don't like to bother people. But what I figured out was, and I now know this later, is that my superpower is connecting with people. People trust me. People connect with me quickly and want to help me and want to do things for me. When I figured that out, I went from almost getting fired to being the number one sales guy. Then I got a new sales job, which doubled my income again. Then I had never made more than $26,000 a year, and I was married, and my wife was pregnant, and I was making $26,000 a year. But I doubled my income. I doubled my income again. I doubled my income again, and kept getting better sales jobs and crushing it to where my wife never went back to work at the time. And all of a sudden, I went from homeless to millionaire, living in $1 million house, driving a sports car. It was whiplash. I joke that I'm a short Jewish Tony Robbins, right? So I'm now in the middle of this opulent neighborhood, the man, the community chair for the Boy Scouts, and the third grade basketball coach, and all that stuff. So that was an interesting ride.
You are definitely dating yourself. For those of you who want to have a little bit of a laugh, he's talking about fax machines. I don't know what those are. He's talking about collect calls. He's talking about Western Union. You got anything else? You got CDs, maybe CDs out there? You're throwing out
Yeah,
those little floppy
this was
disks.
before. This was before. Yeah, I actually did punch cards. I started I did punch cards for the admissions office of a college once.
And it was a lot harder back then than it is now. I mean, no matter what anybody says, the technology is at your fingertips right now. But Mark, what were some of the skills that you learned? Because I see things that you say like confront your to-do list, and we have an honesty problem. Share some of the skills and some of the habits that you created to become successful and to get that sports car and to become a third grade basketball coach, because it doesn't happen overnight. I mean, it takes a lot of muscle and a lot of effort to do that.
The number one thing that I learned was that to do anything I needed to do scared. because I was terrified every day. Just getting out of bed for me was overwhelming. No matter what I did, whether I was waiting tables or in a sales job, everything scared me. And that ability to move past my fear and go show up on time and show up on time prepared, I think was the number one thing that got me where I wanted to go. I had this hunger that like I remember asking my wife to marry me. I said, I may never be anything more than a waiter. You need to be okay with that, because I had no ambitions in life. And she was okay with that. And when we wound up really successful and I wound up kind of rich, it was a shock, but it was because I saw an opportunity and I went way past my fear and I jumped in and I worked my ass off. Right. I worked three times as hard as I needed to because I was terrified that everybody would see that I was this homeless guy, in reality, and that I didn't belong there. So I worked really, really hard. But then later in life, when I became before I became a coach, when I got diagnosed with ADD, when I became a coach, when I became an entrepreneur for myself, and I didn't have an asshole sales manager anymore, and I had to manage myself, that's when the skills came in. That's when I learned how to work smarter, how to, and take advantage of things, because running a business with ADD is really a tough thing, right? The creativity is there, the energy is there, all of that stuff is there, but the stick to itiveness and and getting the things done that need to get done wasn't there. So I had to write a book for myself on how to run a business on with ADD. And what I learned when I wrote the book, Only Tens, Confront Your To-Do List, Transform Your Life, which we published the book the first day. I wrote the book for myself, and it sold 1,500 copies in the first day.
Mm.
It was shocking how many people related to this not being able to focus on what's important. And what I learned is that we don't have an honesty problem. We don't have a time management problem. We have an honesty problem. We are loath to be honest with ourselves on what needs to be done, what we're willing to do, what we're not willing to do. Dishonest with other people. We say yes to things we don't want to do. We don't do things we're afraid to do, but we really want to do. So getting honest with ourselves about what it is we're willing to do and what we're not willing to do. Right. For me, procrastination is just basically dealing with my fear or my not just not wanting to do something. Right. So how do I get myself, and what tools do I need to get myself to do the things I say are important to me? How do I set the boundaries so that other people don't take me off track? Because the entire world, even before phones, the entire world wants your attention. Your family wants your attention. Your friends want your attention. Everything, so after, and then with phones and all that, it's $1 billion industry to get your attention.
Mhm.
So, it's not your fault that you're scattered. The world makes you scattered, but it is our responsibility, if we really want to accomplish something, to take that attention back. And the world isn't going to do it willingly.
Mhm.
Right? They're not going to go, you know what? Don't scroll Instagram. We're going to make it easier for you to not scroll Instagram, or, so that's the problem, is how do we get ourselves to do what we say we want to do?
I want to take you back to the fear. What made you constantly afraid? Because I don't think, even for myself, that very first deal, there was a ton of fear. I don't think the fear or the anger go away. I think we learn how to manage anger, manage fear. This deal we're doing right now, there's less fear, but I still have that fear. I just have the muscle of what on my very first deal, what I did, and I just repeated that process to what I have right now. So I'm alleviating the fear. What caused all that fear inside of you?
I don't know. I was just, I feel like I was just born fearful, but I don't know if you know Michael Singer. He wrote The Untethered Soul and another book called Living Untethered. And in the book, Michael talks about how everybody, if they got in touch with what's in their heart, would realize they're scared. Everybody, the most successful CEO to the homeless person, we all would realize that we're all scared, that we don't belong, that we're not going to be okay, right? We're scared of death, but we cover it up with things that make a bank account, good looks, whatever it is. We cover it up so that we feel like we're okay. And I think I've always been in touch with that fear. Again, I think that's one of the reasons why people connect with me, because no matter how successful I get, no matter how good I look, I will talk about the fact that I've given probably 1,000 talks and I'm still terrified every time I get on stage. right? I will talk about those kinds of things because I want everybody to know if you're not okay, most of us aren't okay with what's going on in the world. All that it's normal to have these feelings.
Mhm.
Now we have these feelings. What do we do with them? How do we work with them? And then now, how do we go do the things we say we want to do, even with those fears?
Stephen Pressfield wrote the book The War of Art, and we've had him on the show a couple of times. And I think the word resistance, as everyone's listening to the word, when I say resistance, what does that evoke? What kind of emotions does that evoke for you? And if it doesn't evoke anything, then the thing you're doing really isn't that important. But if you want to get on stage and sing opera like I do, I've been doing it for 2 years. I got on stage last in October.
Amazing.
If I don't have that resistance and that fear, then it doesn't really mean anything. But if you do and you have that pushback and you have that fear, then it really means something and you're on the right track. Don't lose that feeling of resistance because you know that you were meant to do what you were born to do. And I think that just expands upon yours. As you were saying that, I'm like, oh, I see the connection now because I had students the other night saying, it's really important for me to do this multifamily thing, but I'm afraid to talk to brokers. I'm afraid to talk to investors. Well, if you're starting out, it's a new skill. You should be afraid because it's that important to you. So I think coupling what you're talking about, being vulnerable as a man, it's got to be very challenging to be vulnerable as a man to get up on stage and say, yeah, I've done 1,000 of these and I still feel like throwing up every time. That's challenging. But at the same time, that means you need to be on that stage. That means God put you there and it's your duty not to shy away from the resistance, but lean into the resistance. So thank you for sharing that with me.
Ryan Holiday, who wrote Ego is the Enemy and The Daily Stoic and a bunch of Stillness is Key, a bunch of amazing books. I just read something from him. He said every time he starts a new book, he reads The War of Art again.
Ah.
Like, he reads it again, and I love when someone admits, someone who looks so prolific and like he has it all together, that he admits he has resistance. So every time I go to write a book, right, I commit to writing the book. I tell the world I'm going to write the book. All of a sudden, every reason why I shouldn't write the book comes up. Every reason why I'm an imposter, and then the book also calls me to live into what it is I'm writing. So I have to elevate myself to be the guy who can write the book. So my new book, The Rising Leader Handbook, for me was really a hard one to embrace and to put out in the world because it's putting my stamp, it's putting myself in the arena with a bunch of badass people.
Mhm.
And who am I? This homeless guy. I like to do art. I don't eat nails for breakfast. Like, how can I call myself a leadership coach? Well, it's what I do all day, every day. So putting myself out in the world to do that, to say that, terrifying. And I leaned right in, right. So I like living on the edge of my fear.
It's interesting that Jake isn't here because I'm going to talk about a topic that he really doesn't truly enjoy talking about. And I bet you do, Mark, and it's called self-love. We need to learn how to love ourselves. And if we don't, and we don't accept ourselves, and if Mark continues to see himself as this homeless person who's 27 years old, who's drug addicted, who has no future, and he doesn't love himself and maybe even loathes himself, there's the fear, there's the resistance, and it bubbles up. And at one point, Mark understood, I need to overcome that by getting ready and getting prepared. And he maybe even becomes successful. But if there's not that pullback, he's moving away from pain and not towards pleasure. If you're constantly moving away from pain in your life, it becomes not enjoyable. It becomes soul sucking at some point. And understanding that you need to sort of love yourself. And I don't mean in a stupid kind of way. Oh, I don't mean that. I mean like truly accepting yourself for who you are. Because if you can't love yourself, how are you supposed to love your spouse or how are you supposed to show love for your kids? And that's something that I've come to grips with over the last few years. I don't know if you have any thoughts about that because I saw you smile. You're like, yeah, and I feel you, Gino. It's taken me a little while to do that as well. So,
So that was the biggest turning point in my life. It was after a bit of a midlife crisis and losing everything, and I just hated myself. And I was reading a book called Relax into Wealth by Alan Cohen, and Alan says, "Well, what if you?" And I was actually separated from my wife and my kids at that point. I was living around the corner from them, and I had like these $7 IKEA tables and all of our old furniture, and it was just a dump, and I was miserable. And I was reading, and Alan says, "What if you treated yourself the way you treat everybody else in your life? What if you put yourself at the top of the list?" I'm like, "Top of the list? I'm not even on, I'm not even on the list, right? Why would I ever do that? I am such a shit. And he says, can you not think of yourself as a precious child of God? I'm like, what? And then it dawned on me. It was like, I was a child once. I was a precious child once. Like, I'm worthwhile. And that was blasphemy to me. I'm worthwhile. I went out and bought a Lexus convertible for myself. And my ex-wife was like, finally, she was like, finally, you get it, right? And I furnished my apartment, and I was like, oh my God, if I'm not on my side, who's going to be on my side? And
Mhm.
it was blasphemy, because if I didn't beat myself up first, I knew the world was going to beat me up. So I had to get to it first. I thought
Mhm.
that was how I motivated myself. And when I learned to love myself, I was like an ex-smoker. I had to shout. That's when I became a coach, is I had to shout it from the rooftops, because I was watching my contemporaries in my industry kill themselves. A friend of mine died at 50, right? I watched marriages breaking out. I watched mental health issues. I watched addiction, all to be in the 1%. And when I realized, oh my God, I had this success thing all wrong, that's when I changed my life, and got training and became a coach, so I could help other people be successful in a sustainable and healthy way.
You just glossed over, oh, I just lost everything. How did you like lose everything? That's like a big point in your life, because now you got over the top. But what did you do? Because it seemed like you conquered it. You get married, you have kids, you're living
Right.
in a nice neighborhood, and then the wheels come off the bus again. What happened?
The inner work, like the trauma that turned me into an alcoholic and a drug addict, like the inner, like the outsides were great. I wallpapered over even though I worked the 12 steps and did all this stuff, I still wallpapered over the thing that had me not thrive in the first place. And
Hmm.
that started to seep into my marriage. That started to seep into my health. So all of a sudden I couldn't sell anymore. And I couldn't sell. I was having panic attacks at client sites. I was breaking out in hives. I got really sick. My marriage fell apart. And that was 2009. And I was like stone cold sober. Everything was destroyed. And that's what happens in midlife. If you don't listen to the voices, if you don't do the work you need to do, if you don't have the conversations in your marriage to move it forward, if you don't get some freaking therapy, right, and go beat on some pillows and get some of this stuff out, it starts to turn on you. And that's why, people in their 40s and 50s, have to blow things up. Men generally blow things up in order to change them, instead of having the really difficult conversations. So for me, I found myself in that apartment by myself, and I really thought I was going to die, because I was so sick. And that's when I made the decision that year, if I'm going to die, I was going to run the Marine Corps Marathon, even though I couldn't run a mile. I heard some guy on the radio talking about how everybody could run. So I said, okay, I'm going to run the Marine Corps Marathon. I decided I was going to make $1 million so I could give it to my ex-wife and my kids if I died. I was going to give $60,000 to charity to make up for the fact that I screwed up again. And that year, I focused on those three things. Those were the only things I was going to do, and then I was going to die. I ran the Marine Corps Marathon. I made the $1 million. I gave the $60,000 charity. Uh, and that was again, that was building Mark back in a different way. So while I was running, I was listening to every self-help book you ever can imagine, every spiritual book. I was meditating, I was journaling, I was doing everything they told me to do to get better while I was training for the marathon. So that year later, I came out of my depression. I came out of all that sick, and I was healthier than I'd ever been. I was wildly successful again, and now I was looking at it from a very different lens, and that was
Hmm.
that was that was a huge turning point for me.
You talk in the book, confront your to-do list. I mean, and having the honesty problem. What other tips can you give to the listeners if they're struggling right now and they're saying to themselves, "Yeah, I'm sort of in the same boat. I have all the shiny objects. I'm doing great, but interiorly, I may need a little bit of work."
So the first thing I would say is download my book. It's free on my website. You can have it for free, and that should be helpful. But
What's your
uh,
website? Give me the
uh,
address.
Mark markjsilverman.com, mark the letter J Silverman.com, and you just click on the big red button that says free only tens, and it's all yours. And then plus, there's also a bunch of videos, because most of my clients won't read, so they ask me to make little 5-minute videos of all this stuff. So my entire book is on like all these little 5-minute videos if you don't want to read anything, and that's all free also. But um, the tip for me is slowing down. right? If you're running and gunning so fast and you don't know who you are, what you want, what you like, what you care about, what's important to you, if you haven't slowed down, if you haven't, I teach, I work, coach a lot of people in private equity and in the finance world in New York, and like their legs are bouncing and they're like just nervous wrecks and all that, and I teach them the 1 minute meditation. So I want you to sit at, when, they pay me tons of money. I say, here's your homework. I want you to sit at your kitchen table with your coffee or your tea in the morning. No phone. Look out the window and breathe for 1 minute. They're like, 1 minute? Yes. No phone? Yes. 1 minute, no phone. Can you do 1 minute, no phone? I can try, right? Learning to stop so that you can listen to yourself. And then if you can get to a journaling practice, if you can get to a 5 minute meditation practice, if you can go for walks without your phone, anything you can do to slow down and get in touch with who you are, what you care about, what you want. You still don't have to go have those difficult conversations. You still don't have to set any boundaries. You don't have to do any of that yet. You just have to know that you want to do that. Then you can all of a sudden say, you know what? I really don't like going to this thing on Thursday nights. It's, I don't have the time. I don't have the energy. I think I'm going to quit that particular thing. Right. And you can start setting boundaries. And then the really hard thing for me as a people pleaser was asking for what I want. Like, I would really love help with this, or, like asking for what I want was a revelation for me. So learning to have these difficult conversations, and starting to get room in your life. When you start to set boundaries, when you start to ask for help, all of a sudden you get some spaciousness and room. Now, the problem with that is you're going to feel. If you have room in your life, you're going to feel things you don't want to feel. Remember, we talked about that pain in the heart that everybody carries around that we're all trying to wallpaper over. And that's when you need to, get friends. You need to go on experiential weekends. You need to do the work. Otherwise, your 50s and 60s, I'm the ghost of Christmas future. I tell all my clients, I am the freaking ghost of Christmas future. I am 61 years old. I know what's in store for you if you keep running the way you are and you don't do your work. If you don't go out date night with your spouse once a week, I know what's going to happen if you're not exercising, if you're not turning it off. I know what's going to happen, and I've seen it over and over again. So I'm the ghost of Christmas future. I talk about this stuff as if it's kind of woo and like soft skills, and it's essential if you want to have uh, thriving 50s and 60s and don't want to be on every medication and be alone.
My good friend Philip McKernan, he's the clarity coach, I guess life coach. His whole mission is to eradicate loneliness. So he's very in touch with his emotions. He's been working on this for years. And his great line, great saying, which I think you'll probably love, sit with it. Just sit with your emotions. Those 3 words are so powerful because entrepreneurs, the Jake and Gino community, the Mark Silverman community, we all want to get stuff done. We can't sit with anything. And you may have a relationship that you're struggling with or an idea you're struggling with, and you want to solve it today. Maybe you need to sit with it for a month. Gosh, God forbid, 2 months. But once you can sit with it, you can really accept those feelings and let those feelings work through you. And once you can understand that, it'll give you more clarity. And I think the problem is most people take decisions from a place of low emotions, and that's where we make mistakes. If you can sit with it, work through your emotions, you'll have probably a better chance of making a better decision than if you just fly off the handle like most of us do. I mean, if you can't sit with your phone, you can't sit down for a minute without your phone in the morning, then you need to give Mark a call. You need to get on the call right now
Right.
and schedule a call with Mark, because that's the first step. Then it's really, once you build that muscle, then maybe it's 5 minutes. Then it's boundaries after that. Let's continue on a little bit along. I mean, if you want to add to the sit with it comment, and if you want to
I just want to say
continue
that
on.
like it is the most courageous. I swim with sharks. Like I just go scuba diving with sharks. Like I do scary things. The scariest thing you can do is sit with your own thoughts and with your own feelings. And if you can do that, then you are at the beginning of mastering your life. But just sitting and feeling those feelings and thinking those thoughts and learning. Here's the funny thing about the thoughts and the feelings is they're the same thoughts and feelings that were there yesterday, the day before, the day before. No matter what's going on, they're a freaking lie. They're lying to you daily. And if they were an actual person, you would get a restraining order. But instead, we listen to it all day, every day. So if you can master that, it's no small feat to sit for 5 minutes and breathe. That
Hmm.
is Herculean. That is you being in the arena.
I started something called Wim Hof, the Wim Hof breathing
Mhm.
technique. I read them a couple months ago, and I'm like, you know what? 10 minutes in the morning, I'm going to read 5 minutes of my Bible. I'm going to sit here and do 10 minutes of Wim Hof. And it's like, I'm sitting there and I'm like, I don't really want to do it. It feels like I'm wasting my time, but it does relax. It's all about your physiology. It's all about getting into your state, and it's about taking the 10 minutes down. Now, the phone might be there. I may see it ring. I'm not, don't do that, but and don't beat yourself up over it. You've never done this before. If you're just starting out, it's not easy. Give yourself some. Don't hate yourself. That's what we're talking about, and that's really important. But before we go to the short answers, the boundaries. What's next? What would you say is next in your book that somebody should do?
Hmm. Once you get rid of all the things that you don't want in your life, once you set those boundaries, I do this in the Mastering Overwhelm workshop. I get people to clear their to-do list. I can in 20 minutes I can get your to-do list down to almost nothing. And once they have all that space, I'm like, what belongs in your life that's not in your life? Because these entrepreneurs, like, I'm like, didn't you leave your jobs? Didn't you become entrepreneurs so that you could be the master of your own destiny? They're like, yes. I'm like, are you? And they're like, no. Right. So, and then I go around the room and I have them say, what would, if they had the time, what would they want to do? What would they want in life? And some can't even come up with it, but a lot of them go, oh no, I've been meaning to get a guitar, or I wanted to paint, or my husband or wife and I want to travel with the kids or whatever. I'm like, great. Now that you have the time, what's one step you can take towards, because you can't travel more with your family. You can go home and plan Saturday night to sit down with your family and look at a globe and decide where you want to go. You can do one small step towards something that belongs in your life that isn't in your life.
I'm sad to say, it's basic stuff, but it's not basic habit, or it's not common. It's unfortunate. And this is not rocket science, but nobody teaches us this in school. I know the War of 1812, we almost lost to the British, but I didn't know to sit with my emotions. I didn't know the psychology of my money. If you would tell me what dopamine was when I was in my 20s and 30s, I'm like, I don't know what the hell dopamine is, but I know what the War of 1812 is. And these emotions that we need to learn. Let's take a quick time out to hear from our sponsor.
Now, we have had a great run in multifamily, going from 0 units to over 250 million in assets. That's over 2,000 apartment deals that we've been able to purchase through our framework: buy right, manage right, and finance right.
Now, Jake and I, we created the Jake and Gino community back in 2015. We launched our first book, Build Our Profits. And since then, our students have closed over 60,000 units. That's over $4 billion in assets they've been able to close over the last 6 years.
And that's why this community has been so successful. We call it results-based education, and we pour back into the community everything that we've learned on our journey from 0 to 2,000 units, and all our systems and scale that we use on our very own property management and investing companies.
Jake, I love that. It's not just education, it's implementation. So what I want you to do, click on that link down below, apply to work with our team, see how we can help you on your journey in multifamily. Mark, one book wasn't enough. You got the second book. Why made you write the second book?
Only tens. It's sold about 75,000 copies now, and it's fueled my career for quite a few years. But when I was looking at what I wanted to do for the next chapter, as far as moving from one to many, how do I want to affect more people? We started looking at only tens. We started looking at all that stuff, and someone said, "Why don't you create a program, and why don't you write a book about what you do all day, every day?" I'm like, but I'm not really sure what I do all day. I coach executives, right? So I'm actually a leadership coach, but I've never said those words out loud. I've never called myself a leadership coach.
Why is that?
Never wanted to throw. I don't never saw myself that way. Never saw myself as a former Navy SEAL who hangs from ledges, that kind of thing. I'm just this guy, right? And when we started, started looking at what I do all day long, I teach people. I get the most unruly. I'm known as I fix people. If they're really super talented, really high achievers, but they lack certain manners. They drive the CEO crazy. They don't know how to lead their team. They won't let go of projects. They don't get along with their peers. I take people in the C-suite who need to learn those leadership skills, and I turn them into leaders. So what we did is we codified what it is I do. Someone locked me in a room with sticky notes and made me write down everything I do. And it came down to, I teach people to lead up. I teach them to be trusted advisors. I teach people to lead on a group of peers, right? It's easier to lead a group of people than it is to lead on a group of other leaders who also have agendas and also have ambitions and that kind of thing. So how do you lead, and in the co-opetition of being on a leadership team, then how do you lead your team? And then all of that is actually a ruse, because I want to teach you to lead yourself. So I use your relationship with your superiors, I use your relationships with your peers, I use your relationship with your team to teach you about yourself, because that's what I really care about, is how do you thrive in all these situations. So it's the Rising Leader Handbook: leading up, leading across, leading your team, and leading yourself.
Can you give me some skills that you need to be a better leader? I mean, I'm sure you can go on and on about this, but this is
All
important.
the skills that are in only tens: having difficult conversations, right? If you're not successful as a leader, you're not having enough sweaty palm difficult conversations. You're not giving feedback, you're not delegating, you're not asking for help, you're not coaching, you're not doing the things that you need to do. So that's huge. But the other piece is setting aside your ego. So the workplace, as far as I can say, entrepreneurship and the workplace is a place for you to just live out all your childhood traumas. So every single person in every interaction, whether it's business or personal, reminds you of something from childhood. And you're not really living in the real world. You're living in what your brain is thinking is going on. So you're reacting to all these people and you're not even sure. You're fearful of this. Leadership skills are so easy to teach once people get that their emotional life and what they're making up at work is driving them crazy. So I get people to kind of settle into reality. Did the boss just trash you, or was the boss just upset about something and you took it on? Great. If you just took it on, you can give it back, and now you can be rational and be helpful, right? Are the people on the team actually out to get you, or are they just looking out for themselves, right? How can you shift your perspective on that and get yourself back to grounded and centered? Can you be the leader you need to be for your team? Can you show up and expand your range and be the person who you need to be in each situation? So those are the kinds of things that we teach, but it's all inner work. The skills take care of themselves when you do the inner work.
It sounds as if there's a little bit of therapy in there as well, because I think coaching is great. Coaching looks back at the past, but we're always focusing towards the future. I think therapy, going back into your childhood, I did that back in May. We went to a couples coaching retreat in Ireland with 9 other couples from our community, and Phil was leading it. And it's amazing how, day one, you start in your childhood, you start and realize what happened, what types of traumas occurred. And it's important. And I don't mean they have to be really large traumas, but hey, did your parents have a good relationship? What was their outlook on money? What happened to you? Were you bullied, or whatever that causes? And you bring it into the present and see how you're acting today. And the way you're acting today, you may be lashing out at your wife for something that happened to you 30 years ago. You don't realize that. I think that's the inner work. And it's really hard work to do. But as my buddy likes to say, it's a lot harder not to do it.
Exactly. The consequences of not doing this work are all over the place, and we accept it as regular life. We
Mhm.
accept it as the collateral damage of being successful, and it just doesn't have to be.
Mm-hmm. Let me ask you, as far as when you're working with people and you're seeing it, you're trying to fix people, but would you say you're more transforming them? Because I don't think the word fix, I don't think anyone's truly broken. But, it just stuck out because I'm a big Tony Robbins fan. I want to ask you, who are some of your mentors? Who else do you read? But I remember Tony saying that, because what happens is when people come home from his event, they're all amazing. They're all juiced up. They're all ready to go. And people are like, have you changed? No, we're all basic people. Skills that you're teaching them, skills that Phil, where our lives are being transformed into the people that we want to be. We start living our sole purpose. We start living in lives of abundance instead of lives of scarcity and fear. So, I mean, do you have any mentors, anybody that you've worked with, any books that you read that really shine the light on how they've helped you?
Sure. So Steve Chandler is he's like the godfather of coaching. He's written about 30 books. but he
Wow.
somebody condensed them all into one book called The Very Best of Steve Chandler. And he's taught more distinctions that will transform your life per page than anybody I've ever seen. So the victim owner distinction of being a victim of circumstances or an owner of your experience, right? Busyness equals laziness, right? That my whole only tens came out of him teaching me busyness equals laziness, because you're too lazy make priorities, right? The Very Best of Steve Chandler is a great book for you to just dive into to get these distinctions. The most important, no, two most important books I give out to people are Awareness by Anthony DeMello.
I've
He's
heard of that. Yes.
Awareness is probably, and he's a Catholic priest, so he's based in kind of Christian uh, principles, so for people to be able to relate to it. I'm Jewish, and I'm more Buddhist than anything, but that's really accessible. And then the Living Untethered by Michael Singer is
Mm.
probably the most accessible spiritual book I've ever read. Um, those are the kinds of books that I like to share.
I could speak to you for hours because every time you say a sentence, I don't want to use the word trigger, but at that retreat feels like no reading books, put away the phone. You need to ask yourself, if you're listening to this right now, are you reading books? Are you performing at a high level? Are you trying to be busy because you're trying to avoid your thoughts? You're trying to avoid the work. And at some point, I was like that. I couldn't sit still. I always needed to do and try to be performing. I tried to get the most out of the day. Well, am I doing that because I'm trying to avoid something? Or am I doing that because I have to do that? And that's a challenging question. I would pose that question to anybody listening right now. And that may be something where you feel vulnerable, you maybe feel transparent, but that's the reality. Once you start looking at it from that perspective, I don't know what your thoughts are on that. But when you said that, I was like, wow, was enlightening. When I heard that, I was like, oh, okay, busyness, laziness. That makes total sense to me.
One of my mentors is Dr. Jeff Spencer, and most people don't know about him. He's an Olympic cyclist, and he's Richard Branson's coach. He's Bono's coach. He's Tiger Woods' coach. So this guy is the coach of coaches. He's brilliant. I just spent the weekend with him. We've gotten to be friends, and he teaches this thing called receivership. It's restraint and receivership, and he says, you're not playing at full potential if you're running and gunning, if you're not pausing, if you're not allowing something intangible, that intuition, the universal wisdom, God, whatever you call it, if you're not allowing that in to inspire you to different action, to a better action, and you're just running, he says, you're not playing at your full potential. And then he adds in restraint. So do you have the restraint to not go after the shiny objects? Do you have restraint to not do the time wasters and all that stuff? And if you take this receivership, this slowing down, this listening, and then acting, and couple it with the restraint, he says that's how he gets exponential results for his clients. And when I look at his client list, I'm like, the guy knows what he's talking about. So I wear the bracelet, receivership and restraint, because he taught me that. So he's a new mentor that I'm trying to get him to write his book, because he's amazing.
Isn't conventional wisdom really just conventional crap if you think about it? Yeah, even my buddy Phil said time is your most precious asset. That's what we're all taught. And he's like, he goes, it's horseshit. Because if you're spending your time doing the wrong things, is it really an asset? I mean, that's important. Like, if you're spending your time running and gunning all the time and not gunning towards your sole purpose, but going towards something that you think is going to make you happy, but ultimately doesn't, didn't you just waste all your time doing that? So understand that conventional wisdom. Mark's, you may be an entrepreneur right now going, I don't have the time to do that. I need to run and gun. I don't have the time to think. Well, if you look at all the wealthy people on this planet right now, they're the thinkers. John D. Rockefeller became wealthy back in the early 1900s because he was one of the only thinkers. Everyone was working while he was thinking. I mean, same thing. I'm in St. Augustine. Henry Flagler was Rockefeller's business partner. He was a thinker. All of these people are thinkers. Jeff Bezos, you look at them all, I'm sure that they pull back and say to themselves, what's in the future? I have to actually take my time, use my intuition, And I think if you don't do that and you're constantly under pressure and you're what I call in a catabolic state, always having cortisol running through your body, chronically inflamed, and we can go on and on about all this. I wish I'd known this when I was in my 20s. I knew about the War of 1812, but I didn't know about cortisol. I didn't know about chronic inflammation. My back is killing me. I wonder why. I'm just saying, everybody, this is so important. Mark, where can the listeners get more of a hold of you? Buy your books, website? Where can they reach out to you?
Everything is at markjsilverman.com, mark_silverman.com, or you can see me on the socials. There's enough of my face on socials. I put out a video almost every single day. They call it Media Mark. But yeah, there's tons of free stuff on my website. Everything that we talked about here, there's a video for it. There's book recommendations there. There's ways to get in touch with me. And then there's the free Only Tens and a free summary of the Rising Leader Handbook, which is coming out on March 5th. We just picked the date. March 5th.
All right. As far as I'm concerned, there's probably not enough Mark J. Silverman. Now, if I speak to his wife, she's probably going to go, there's a little too much Mark online. I like to pull him back a little bit, but that's okay. I'm going to recap Mark's story real quick for everybody. At the age of 18, he doesn't go to college. He starts working at a bar, making $100 a night. You know what? Drink, party, spend money, make money. You get in that vicious loop. And then when you get to the age of 27 years old, you're 135 pounds. You're sleeping in the back of your car. You're sleeping in Seattle and you're like, I don't have a life here. What's going on? I'm a wreck. And he gets pulled in by his brother and fortunately gets connected with his brother and living with his brother, blackmailed, saying, you have to stay at home with me and you have to go to AA and you have to straighten out your life. And once Mark does that, he understands his superpower of connecting with people. He hates being a salesperson. But then you know what? He understands sales is just providing value and just trying to connect with that other person. Gets married, starts crushing it. And then all of a sudden, everything falls apart in 2009. And there we go again. Mark's probably saying to himself, I suck. I hate myself. What do I need to do? And then he finds his inner peace. He finds self-love. He finds that he needs to work on himself. He runs that, I don't know what it's called, a Marines marathon. He makes he makes $1 million. He gives away 60 grand to charity. I'm giving the cliff notes here, but you get it. He goes from, the depths of depression to greatness, back down. And I think the common thread or the common theme throughout his life has been work on yourself, give yourself time, sit with it. Don't rush. You have the intuition. You know what you want. You just need to slow down and you need to go buy Mark's book. Thanks, Mark, for being on the show. I appreciate it, brother.